And welcome to Ask Me Anything About Politics. My name is Jarrett, and I'm here to answer all of your questions about politics, be they simple or complicated. Everybody is welcome here, whether you are a Republican, a Democrat, something in the middle, something on the outskirts. I'm not here to judge you or roast you or fight you based on your political affiliation. It is just good faith answers to all of your good faith questions about politics. So if you got any questions about politics, just throw them in the chat and we will get to answering them. Christopher, are you just calling me a Jew? Is that really what you're doing here on my live stream? Because that's not really cool. It's not. Anyways, what a way to start. I mean, are we doing peace? Like, is that the thing, Christopher? Because that doesn't seem like it. You're on thin ice, pal. To everybody else, welcome to. All right, yeah, you're right. Christopher, see you later. Goodbye. Chloe says, "Do you agree with schools only teaching left wing and not showing right wing as well?" I guess I wouldn't agree with that, Chloe, but that doesn't really happen anywhere. There are schools where the opposite happens, but there's no schools that just teach a left wing ideology, unless you ascribe to a specific kind of right wing ideology where you believe that certain history lessons are inherently left wing biased, like the fact that Jim Crow was bad or that slavery was bad. Let's see here. Chloe says, I live in the UK, though, so that's just what they do here. I do not believe that that is accurate, Chloe. I do not believe that that is a real thing. Joe, I don't understand what those words are. Gosh, good to see you again. Mikhail, good to see you again. Odinson says, how do we make higher education cheaper? That is a really good question, Odinson. Hold on. Let me get to that 1 second. Gosh says, what age do you want a president to be? I think the recent ones are too old and want a legal limit. Yeah, I think somewhere between the ages of 35 and 70 is probably ideal. Now, how to make higher education cheaper? I'm not 100% sure. Um, there's a lot to the inflated cost of higher education. Like Malcolm Gladwell did this whole thing about just colleges' endowments, like how much money they just have that they're not using for anything, and it's kind of staggering. There's a lot of issues with like the Ivy Leagues specifically, and legacy admissions and stuff like that. I think if I was going to offer one specific policy to try to bring down the cost of higher education, and again, there's probably a lot that can be done. I would say that there should be free public colleges and have private colleges compete with public colleges, and then maybe we can see some of that competition bring down the costs. What's up, Joe? How are you? What's up, Lady Lynn? Juju says free Palestine. That's not a question. Somebody who's neo-libertarian phalangelist son or accelerationist daughter. I don't know what neo-libertarian phalangist is. It feels very trolly to me. Somebody tell me if everybody who put that is trolling or not trolling, because it does feel trolling. Let's see here. Thank you, Lady Lynn. What's up, Spyrus? What's up, Sahar? Sahar says, what do you think about Israel-Palestine? I think that the populations are both relatively innocent and the governing bodies of both are both relatively guilty. I think that because Israel is the more powerful nation, it's their responsibility to be the ones extending the olive branch and trying to create peace in that region. As it stands, the extremely right-wing Netanyahu government is doing the opposite of that. Netanyahu is a war criminal who many organizations, even independent organizations found within Israel, have concluded that he is perpetuating a genocide against the people of Palestine, in addition to being a warmonger of all the surrounding nations. And so I think he deserves to be in jail, and I hope that the people of Israel are smart enough to not vote for him going forward. Jao says, "What do you think about immigration? I'm for it." Somebody says it's a far right Catholic ideology, so it's troll. So are you saying that it's trolling when people put it, or are you saying that I'm incorrect in saying that it's a troll? And also, what do I call you? I don't know what your little screen name thing means. It looks like a little house or something. All right, Ash says, it seems like people discount my political views because I'm not a mainstream religion. Well, I don't think that religion, that having a religion, be it a mainstream religion or not, should discount your political views. So, are there other views that you have that make it seem like people discount them? Yasser says, America first or Israel first? Well, definitely not Israel first. I believe in taking care of American citizens, but I also believe that we need organizations like USAID, and we need to be supporting countries like Ukraine. And I'm happy to go into more details about that. All right, John Abbott says phalangism was Spain's Catholic extremist version of fascism. Gotcha. All right, Mikhail says, what would you do if Trump was at your comedy show? Probably ignore him or roast him or just tell him you fucking suck. 7 Days in Heaven says, talk about USS Liberty. Can you be more specific? Did something happen to it? Ash says, what are your thoughts on isolation and the Monroe doctrines? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Monroe Doctrine is the one that basically said that America is free to kind of like colonize other nations, right? Or like take over all of South America or something. And if I'm remembering correctly, then I'm not for the Monroe Doctrine. Also, my thoughts on isolation is it doesn't work. Yeah, it's not the correct way to run a country, because issues that exist in other countries, even overseas, will eventually reach America. Ernesto Lopez says, are you Democrat or Republican? I'm a Democrat. Mikhail Meme says, thoughts on Joe Rogan? I think that a lot of people who know Joe Rogan personally, and I think probably even Joe Rogan himself would admit that the amount of political power that he has is inappropriate for how uninformed of a human being he is. That being said, I do kind of blame him for wielding that power extremely irresponsibly, and I think he has some really toxic views. So I do not support and I do not endorse. Zero Fox Given says, "What's your take on what's happening in Ireland right now?" I do not know enough about it. Odin says, "Is universal healthcare the best answer for our system, or better regulations on privatized?" I mean, I think that there are so many things kind of like artificially propping up our version of healthcare that isn't universal healthcare. Like, it just makes way more sense to have universal healthcare than to try to use glue to hold our current healthcare system together with glue and duct tape. Okay. Nick Jodab says, Monroe Doctrine was basically telling Europe that the Western Hemisphere was off limits for future colonization, that any test would be seen as hostile actions to the U.S. But is that implied, John Abbott, that is because everything in the Western Hemisphere belongs to America, or was that just trying to tell Europe to stop colonizing because we're done with empire building? Ash says, is it likely I'm not going to be taken seriously politically because I am a trans woman? I mean, that is not going to have any bearing on how seriously I or the people in this live stream take you. Mihu says, your beard got bigger. It looks even better now. Thank you. I mean, just not having time to trim it because I have a newborn. Clean Fresh Edit says, what do you think of the Carmelo Anthony case? So I don't know anything about that. Spyro says, is California becoming red or not? No. Odinson says, there's some crazy riots going on in Belfast at the moment. I did hear that was happening. I did not read into at all why it was happening and what the various factions are. Fat Christ says, talk about the USS Liberty when Israeli forces attacked a United ship for over 23 minutes. When did that happen? Was that a recent thing? Tony Perez says, can Trump run for a third term? No, it is unconstitutional. That does not mean that he will not try. It does not mean that the current Republican Party or extremely right-wing Supreme Court might, finagle some justification for him trying to stay in office. Allison Berger says, define capitalism right now. Do you want me to define capitalism right now, or do you want me to define capitalism in present day? Spire says, is China's policy capitalism, communism, or a mix of both? I believe it is a mix of authoritarianism and capitalism. Okay, Adu Mel says, your take on Zionism? I would like everybody who uses the term Zionism to sit down at a table and decide on what it means. Does Zionism mean that the people who are currently living in Israel should be allowed to stay there and that they should not be ethnically cleansed out of that region? Or does Zionism mean that Israel has the right to take over all of its surrounding countries and treat every brown person in the surrounding country like a second-class citizen? Chris's opinion on illegal immigration. I think we should be a little bit more loosey-goosey about illegal immigration. I think that for some reason we have this idea that poor people and people that are struggling need to, adhere to the letter of the law, but rich and powerful people can get away with a lot more shit. And I think that we should reverse that. I think that if somebody is struggling and running away from cartel violence or civil war, we should be a little loosey-goosey about how long they've been here or what they had to do to come here. And if there's a rich person who gets caught cheating on their taxes or poisoning the local water supply, then we should be extremely strict and harsh in our what do you call it? In our adjudicating of that wrongdoing. Triska, Chrostatic, and Rabab, thank you so much for helping me reach my first 3 gift goals of the day. I was being a little loosey-goosey about announcing those gift goals. But thank you to everybody who is contributing. We are now on to Finger Hearts at only 11 minutes in. We are making record time today. John Abbott says, it was less this belongs to us and more this is under our protection because we don't want your military to have a foothold here. Oh, that is pretty interesting. Yeah, I just assumed that the Monroe Doctrine was much more about America claiming the entire Western Hemisphere. But boy, oh boy, you learn something new every day, or at least I do. That's how you stay young, everybody. Iron Diamond says, Berenstein, well. Iron, this is not your first time here, so I would hope that you would not just do knee-jerk anti-Semitism. All right, Gonzalo says, what's your opinion on the Jose Antonian doctrine? Don't know anything about that. Ash says, why don't we just do a flat net value tax to make it where people can't cheat them? Our tax code is purposefully opaque and extremely complicated. And if you're asking me, like, why isn't that a good idea, or why do we have the tax code that we have right now, they're like kind of 2 different questions. I would say that I can imagine a world in which we would need a little bit more complexity than just a net value tax. I'm open to an argument that a net value tax might be the move, but like a flat income tax is not the move. Getting rid of income tax is not the move. The system that we have right now does not work. Like, where you have a whole bunch of billionaires who can have like a fleet of private jets and private mansions and private yachts while people are struggling to make ends meet. Like, that's not a good system. Iron Diamond says, what is your opinion on the Freemasonic oligarchy? I don't know how a Freemasonic oligarchy is different than our current oligarchy. I don't know. Freemasons always sounds like real conspiracy theory shit to me. Scott says, why does MAGA believe November will be a red wave? A lot of people who vote Republican, a lot of people in the MAGA movement, they tend to be that way because they get their news from one specific source, which is right-wing media sources, which kind of tells them what they want to hear and doesn't tell them a lot of, contrary information or anything that might kind of like pop their information bubble. And so they're probably not getting all of the news about how awful things have become because of the Trump administration and how Trump has betrayed his base and is lying and cheating and stealing, and how poorly he's polling and how well Democrats have been doing in every special election since 2024. All right, Odin says MAGA feels more like a sports team than a political movement. I mean, some people have said cult, some people say sports team. AQ says, do you think the hot dog prices are getting out of hand? I am unaware. I mean, I know that prices in general are going up. I'm unaware about hot dog prices specifically. SG99 says, thoughts on Vivek Ramaswamy? Vivek Ramaswamy is a right-wing political hack. Do not vote for, do not endorse. Chris says, high or low taxes? High for the rich, low for everybody else. Mikhail Beam says, thoughts on Nick Shirley? I don't remember who he is. A Damn Man says, hey, bro, in the UK here, and crazy what the world is coming to be honest, crazy over here and over there. Yeah, things are bananas, and I blame the rich. Okay, SXN says, what do you think of Canada? We are the only G7 in a recession. I do not believe that that is accurate, that you are the only G7 in a recession. But I like Canada, and I also like left-wing political parties, so I'm definitely not going to blame the recession on Carney. Phil says, do you think Trump has doomed the Knicks? I don't, but I do think that he's the reason why their winning streak is over, and I think him going to that game was a giant fuck you to everybody in New York. Tom says, thoughts on the referee that got sent away? Yeah, the Trump administration is blatantly racist, and they don't really make good decisions. Okay, Tom says, beliefs about Thomas Sankara, don't know who that is. Nolan says, thoughts on a land value tax? I'm a little unclear about how a land value tax is different than a property tax. Ralph says, opinion on Restore Britain. It is a far-right party that scapegoats immigrants instead of addressing the real problems caused by the billionaire class. Do not vote for, do not endorse. Iron Diamond says, do you believe in Tartaria? I don't know what that is. Santiago says, what about El Dorado? I don't know who that is. Shork says, should Central Park be turned into a data center? No. We need more green areas and not less. AQ, I already answered that one. Stop spamming. Alberts says, I personally think that Palestine is all a political weapon. What do you think? No, I mean, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. It is not a political weapon. It is definitely a political cudgel for certain people. Like Netanyahu is inflaming tensions between Israel and Palestine artificially, and there's reporting to suggest that he has been funding Hamas because he wants there to be a war so that he can stay in power. But no, the people in Palestine are really suffering. There is very real animosity between the citizens in Israel and the citizens of Palestine. Okay, Ash says, I advocate for the abolishment of the majority of taxes. Why could this be bad? Because if people don't pay taxes, then we don't have money for government programs, and then people suffer, mostly poor people in marginalized communities. Gosh says, are you an atheist? I am not an atheist because I am not confident that there is no God, the same way that I'm not confident that there is a God. I believe we call that being an agnostic. Jeffrey Shelton says, what is a data center? So I'm not sure if you've seen the news, Jeffrey, but there's all these data centers that are being propped up in order to create more compute for artificial intelligence research and models. And basically what we need are these like giant server farms that are just like constantly running computer programs so that we can make better AI faster, cheaper, more powerful, etc. And they're a problem. Unregulated AI centers being created are everywhere are a problem. Emperor says, who's going to win the World Cup? No idea. Tom says, what problems do right-wing parties create? All the problems. They are the problem of propaganda and misinformation. They are the problem of lying and cheating to win elections. They are the problem of income inequality and environmental degradation and climate change and issues with illegal immigration can all be traced back to their the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis. Like that is all the fault of right-wing politics, at least in America. Stephen Peterson then, it's no fake question to ask, what are your thoughts with Carmelo Anthony being found guilty? I don't know anything about his case. Nathan says, what do you think of the conservatives? Are you talking about American conservatives? Nolan says, thoughts on a carbon tax? I'm for it. That Sunday Rain says, how do we ever move forward from this? The system has been rotten inside and out forever. So that is untrue, I would say, that Sunday Rain. Like, there are issues with the system, but the system gets better or worse depending on who is in charge of it. There are things that we can do to try to fix the government. And the only way that we do that, though, is people need to actually get out there and do the work of making that change happen. Right now, the system that we have in place makes it really easy for the rich and the powerful to continue dividing people, continue to get people fighting amongst themselves, and entrench themselves in money and power going forward. Now, the advantage that we have as individual citizens is that there's a lot more of us. And so if we all organize and do the work and communicate with each other offline and, strike and protest and boycott and convince other people to join us, then we can fix all these issues lickety split. The issue is that it's a lot harder to do that when everybody is struggling to make ends meet. So hopefully everybody does a little bit of work. We get out of this. Things are looking good. Like we're still in a bad place because the rich and powerful are currently in control of the American government, and they are basically just like grifting and conning and trying to, cement their own minority rule. But people who are doing the work are seeing the work. We just need more people doing it for longer. Okay. Ben says left or right? Left. Dana Point Live says, how do we solve the homeless crisis? There are a bunch of things that we need to do. I would say number one, part of the homeless crisis is a lack of affordable housing. I think part of the housing crisis is the way that we have dealt with addiction issues. I think, yeah, you solving poverty and making it so that there isn't this, sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like swim or die mentality towards American capitalism. I think would do a lot to solve the homelessness crisis. Nathan says, "Who do you prefer, Trump or Biden?" Biden every day of the week. Ben3 says, "Ha ha ha, left." Okay. Sean says, "Do you like Soros and Gates?" I mean, I don't think there's such a thing as an ethical billionaire. That being said, George Soros and Bill Gates have done a lot of billionaire philanthropy, which is like, obviously it's not enough. Like, I'd much rather they be taxed to the point where they're not billionaires. And I think that Gates's associations with Jeffrey Epstein are real fucking sketchy. But as far as I can tell, the only bad thing that George Soros did is he shorted the British pound in order to make a whole bunch of money, which, when you short something, it kind of causes that thing to fail a little bit, and if enough people short something, that kind of like helps push things over the edge. But yeah, I am pressed for examples about what worse than that thing George Soros has done. Kuwaiti says, why is Obama a war hawk? He's not. Do you think Trump is a war hawk, Kuwaiti Kami? Because I believe that Trump has done way more to try to create wars and global instability than Obama ever did. Jake the Manu Farm says, there's a game called Statecraft Politics I recommend you play. It's on Roblox. I'll give it a go. Farouk says, who is your best politician? Probably Mamdani. Nathan says, why do you prefer Biden to Trump? I mean, I think that just looking at their administrations, Biden did a lot of good and Trump did a lot of bad based on their individual personalities. Biden is a person with a lot of empathy who seems like he was in government to try to help. Trump only went into government to try to enrich himself and to try to enact racist policies. Lowell Slayer says opinions on JFK. He seemed like an okay guy. Don't think he should have gotten assassinated. Stephen Peterson says, do you think Gabe Newell would be the closest thing we have to an ethical billionaire? Isn't he the Steam guy? Isn't he being accused of doing a monopoly right now? All right. Optimus says, pizza or lasagna? Lasagna. Coco says, exactly, Biden was amazing. I don't know if I want to give him amazing, but if we're judging him based on his administration, the dude was fucking 10 out of 10. But there's an open question as to how much of that he was responsible for, because he was definitely declining because of old age through his administration. Ben3 says, bro, react, opine about Russia. Vladimir Putin is a dictator and a war criminal and a psychopath and an oligarch. He has been stealing the resources of his own country to enrich himself and his billionaire buddies. I think that the people in Russia should do everything they can to remove him and everybody that's associated with him from political power. And I think we should do everything we can to support Ukraine because they are doing a really great job of protecting their borders. All right, Chris11 says, communism, socialism, or social democracy. I'm unclear what people mean when they say social democracy. I would say that I kind of like a mixed model like they have in Norway and Sweden. Sorry, Mikhail, I'm still saying that that's the thing. But yeah, a little bit of all three of those I think seems good. Is that what you mean by social democracy, Chris? Jeremy says, egos, personality aside, do you think Trump's administration is more productive than Biden's? No, without question. It is. It's productive in grifting and corruption, but as far as like helping people or accomplishing things, no, absolutely not. I think that the Biden administration was singularly productive in a way that few presidential administrations have been in recent memory. Where I think an argument could be made that he was able to enact more progressive gains in 4 years than Obama was in 8 years. Now, was that because Biden was better than Obama? I don't think so. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances to keep in mind. So this person just put HH, what I'm pretty sure is about the painter. So I'm going to go ahead and block that guy right now. James Foster says, thoughts on Israel? I'm for the people, I'm against the government. Stephen Peterson said, yeah, he's the same guy. He generally puts the consumers first and pays his employees well. Yeah, seems like an alright guy to me. But again, that is not my area of expertise. Mikhail Meme says, how do I convince my right-wing dad that white people commit the most amount of crimes in the U.S.? I guess I would just start by asking your dad what are the sources that he would believe. Because a lot of times if you just give people facts and data, it doesn't really change their mind. It just kind of makes them be like, all right, well, that thing that you just showed me is fake. I mean, there's a ton of data on this. So I guess I would just ask him, do you believe that immigrants do crimes at a higher rate per capita than naturalized citizens, and where does that belief come from? Convincing people is about kind of like finding out where they are and then building a bridge between where you are to that person. But if you just give them a paper and go, this is data that proves that you're wrong, then that doesn't really change any minds. Okay, John Abbott, the difference between a land value tax and property tax is that land value tax is based solely on the location value of the land, as if it was undeveloped. It ignores the value of any buildings on the property. So if you buy a house and improve it, raising the value, and LVT will stay the same, while the property tax goes up with value. Yeah, I guess I'm down for a property tax then as opposed to an LVT. All right, Apostle Cosm says, opinion on Jews. My opinion about Jewish people is the same as my opinion about Muslim people and Christian people and Buddhists, etc. They're all fine. Chris says, ooh, get into how most of Trump's craziness were laid out by the Biden's 2,700-page infrastructure bill. I'm not really sure how the infrastructure bill relates to Trump, Chris. Can you speak more about that? Ivan Cisco says, how will Trump be held accountable in regards to the Epstein files since he has immunity? So I do not know that the Supreme Court's immunity decision has the kind of teeth that a bill passed by Congress and signed into law by a Democratic president would not be able to undo. And if it would not, I think adding seats to the Supreme Court or impeaching some of the Supreme Court justices is probably the move after that. But yeah, just because the Supreme Court said so does not make it so. I think that there's a very good chance that Trump faces some sort of criminal liability for the things that he did in his first and second term. I think the highest likelihood is just that he dies before it happens, unfortunately. Garfield says, who will win the New Zealand election? I do not know. Nobody knows. Davey says, is immigration a problem if the integration of a large amount of people is not feasible? There are logistical issues with large amounts of people coming into a new country, but if adjustments can be made to account for those numbers of people coming in and making sure that there are the correct number of houses and opportunities and social safety nets, etc., then immigrants are a net positive on any country that they go to. Most countries are experiencing population decline or birth rate decline. So we're going to need those people to come here anyways. It's better. Additionally, we don't know what the world environment is going to look like in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And so I think it behooves all of us to be a little bit more fucking chill about who moves where, because it could be some fucking 2012 shit and everything north of San Diego is completely uninhabitable because of a new ice age or something, we got fucking screwworm in Texas. We got ticks that make it so that you can't eat meat coming up from the south and shit like that. Like, thank you, climate change. Thank you, fossil fuel companies. Okay, Lucy says, do you think the world is starting to become more right-wing? I do not. What we have seen, the rise of right-wing ideologies, is a completely inorganic reaction based on the billionaire class and right-wing autocrats sort of like artificially creating that movement. Now, people I think are waking up to that fact, but the billionaire class is not stopping. Like, they're continuing this pressure and misinformation campaign, and they have the resources to keep this up for a really long time. This is part of the reason why there shouldn't be billionaires, is because if you have that much money, you are able to spend that money convincing people to vote against their better interests and creating governments that serve you and fuck over everybody else. So yeah, I think that as people are waking up to that, we need to, you know, we need to keep the pedal to the metal so that so that they cannot fight their way back to people becoming more, or them convincing people to become more far right wing. All right, Pietro Diga says, does Trump hate big black guys? I think Trump is, as a human being, I believe that he has racism inside of him. Jay says, do you think a third party candidate winning presidency has any feasible chance of happening? No. Ryan says, well, what do you think of the reform in the UK? Reformer UK is a far right party that blames immigrants for problems that are caused by billionaires. Do not endorse, do not vote for. Pietro Diaz says, Israel is bad. I'm assuming that's a question. And the government of Israel is bad. Netanyahu is bad. The people in Israel are not bad, by and large. Shane Diamond says, don't blame others for you being broke. I'm not broke. I get a lot of money from your mom. Ketchup says, voter ID is just a permit to vote. No, voter ID is a voter suppression method that the Republican Party is trying to use to cement themselves into power. Ketchup, I'm happy to go into more detail on that if you like. Fog War Production says, how will the 26 midterm elections affect LeBron's legacy? I don't know if it will have any effect on LeBron's legacy. Nolan says, what do you think the carbon tax rate should be? I personally think around $200 per metric ton. Oh, the specifics of how much polluters should pay for polluting, I have not looked into the white sheet on that. But we need to have both a stick and a carrot approach. We need to we need to punish polluters and reward people who are trying to set up renewable energy infrastructure. All right, Pietro Diga says, is Netanyahu a dictator? No, he is a war criminal, though. But as far as I know, the government in Israel is still able to vote him out of power. Pietro Diga says, do you recognize Palestine? Yes, I do. Dr. Fruit Snack says, isn't it exciting that we got Plattner as nominee for Maine? I think it's exciting. I like Plattner as a candidate. I think he will be a really good senator. It is true that he has a lot of scandals. I think that his scandals are explained because, as he mentioned, he came out, he started campaigning. He was like, listen, I'm a former vet. I had PTSD. I had addiction issues. I had anger issues. And then everybody who's doing opposition research on him went and found all the things that he did while he was suffering from PTSD and addiction issues and anger issues. And now I'm glad that the voters of Maine seem to be down with giving him a second chance, despite what he did when he was suffering from PTSD and addiction issues and anger issues. I hope that he is able to beat Susan Collins. And then if he becomes senator, I hope that he is able to show us that he is a different person. Ryan says, but Reform 1, doesn't that support the idea of the rise of the right wing? No, I don't think so. So long as right-wing ideologies are so intimately connected to the billionaire class, I do not view their popularity as being organic at all. I mean, if you can show me it working well for the population, then maybe you'll convince me that there are some people who legitimately believe that that is better. But as far as I can see, every single right-wing government does nothing but fuck over their own populations in favor of a powerful minority that gets to do whatever the fuck they want. Pietro Diga says, is Trump gay? I have no idea. Solaris says, how will Trump's threats to Iran impact my Walmart opening hours? You know, that kind of seems like kind of a silly question, Solaris, but it is possible that because Trump is continuing to escalate the war with Iran, we're going to see both, an energy crisis in addition to a cost crisis, meaning that stores are not going to be able to afford to stay open for as long as they normally are. Okay. Mikhail Meme says he believes that African Americans commit the most amount of crimes. It sounds like your dad has some very has some deep-seated racist beliefs. And undoing that is going to take a lot of work if that's something that you're interested in doing. I would recommend checking out a book called The Persuaders by Anand Giridharadas. If you don't want to write that down, it's on my recommendation page on my Discord. Link is in my bio, so go check that out. All right, Solar says, oh no, my Walmart. That's very funny. All right, Andrea's Niku says, what do you think is better, left or right wing? Left wing. Vazdan says, do you not feel like that carbon tax is unfair to poorer folk who can't afford greener alternatives? So that's a really good point, Vazdan. Where all of these policies are concerned, I think we need to make sure that the knock-on effects are not affecting people that are poor, working class, struggling, marginalized, etc. Now, I don't believe that there is any policy that is specifically targeting, climate change and the poor at the same time. But if there is a policy that we're instituting, kind of like carte blanche, that we are not recognizing is hurting more impoverished communities, then yeah, we need to make adjustments. Perhaps, doing some kind of means testing, or giving people assistance and subsidies for being able to afford, renewable energy infrastructure, like getting an electric car or some shit like that. We have some of those incentives in California, which is great. But when you do those incentives, you also need to make sure that you have some sort of price controls in place so that companies don't just increase the cost of their goods to match the subsidies that you're giving to people. Okay, Triska Muzzking. Triska and Muzzking, thank you so much for helping me reach my first finger hearts goal of the day. All right, Pietro says, does Taiwan exist? I believe so, but the Taiwan policy is pretty complicated, so I can't really speak in much more detail than that. I will just say that if there are Taiwanese people that want to have their own country, they should be able to have their own country. Okay. Ketchup says green energy promotes self-sufficient. I generally think that that's pretty accurate. Chris says difference between communism and socialism. So ask 100 different people and you'll get 100 different answers for that, Chris. Here's how I define it, and I find that this to be one of the more useful ways of defining it. Economically, communism is the workers owning the means of production. So an employee-owned company is communism. Socialism is where we all pay taxes, and then the government uses that taxes to pay for things that hypothetically help everybody. So we pay taxes, the government paves our roads. We pay taxes, the government builds public education. We pay taxes, the government gives us a fire department. That's socialism. Now, again, other people might, differ with my semantics, but I find that to be a very useful way of delineating those two economic philosophies. Mikhail Mean says, thoughts on centrism. Centrism, I think, is easy to weaponize, where if you know that somebody is a centrist and you want to push them further to your ideology, all you need to do is go further than you want away from the centrists. So, like, let's say that you and I are negotiating on the price of a car, and I know that you're going to meet me halfway no matter what my number is, and you say $1,000 and I go $1 million, so now you have to meet me at halfway between $1,000 and $1 million. Like, that doesn't really seem fair. Okay, John Abbott says there's an argument to be made that land value tax is better for the lower middle class because it makes housing more affordable and makes it easier to start new businesses due to lower retail rent. But I've not seen an argument to that effect, which also addresses the negative impact of reduced tax revenue in places that rely heavily on property tax to fund schools and other programs. Yeah, for my money, John Abbott, I see that as only a way for rich people to skirt paying taxes on their mansions, and the way that golf courses and country clubs are able to not pay taxes on how much insane revenue they are able to rake in. But I'm open to this. Like, maybe it needs to be more complicated than that. This is a little bit, John Abbott, like the argument about whether the Democratic Party needs to be further to the left or further to the right, where it's not, it isn't one or the other, it's policy specific, where Americans believe that the Democratic Party should be further to the left on economic issues and healthcare issues, but further to the right on things like immigration and law enforcement. So yeah, maybe we need to see some kind of land value tax and mansion tax, something like that. Gosh says, what do you think of churches but paying taxes? I think that if you are a legitimate religious organization that is focused on the betterment of the community and charity, then I understand you being exempt from paying taxes. But if you are a mega church whose pastor is a millionaire, multimillionaire, and you are trying to convince your flock to vote for specific candidates, then no, I do not think that you deserve tax exempt status. Paul said, should, in your opinion, the two-party system be abolished? No. The issue that I have with the two-party system is that it locks out other parties, but I don't have an issue with the two specific parties because we have a mechanism within those parties to change the parties. So it's not like Democrats are kind of like locked into being what Democrats are. Like if we all went out and voted for different Democrats in the primary, we could just replace everybody that's in charge of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party would be a completely different party. Now, if we want to open up the political process to other political parties, which I'm down for, we need ranked choice voting so that candidates don't end up being spoilers for the candidate that is closest to them in ideology. And the only way we get ranked choice voting is by voting for Democrats. All right, Gosh says, do you think the Democrats are true left? So I would say, Gosh, the answer to that is yes and no. It is true that the politicians who are true left are only in the Democratic Party. Like there are none in the Republican Party. But it's also true that the Democratic Party is a big tent. And so we have some people who are more centrist, neoliberal, corporate shills, whatever derogatory term you want to use for them. And I think that that benefits the Democratic Party. I think that's part of our strength is that we have both Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer. Vazdan says, what are your thoughts on thorium-based nuclear energy? Is that the mini nuclear reactors, Vazdan, that don't take a decade to build? Let me know. I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Ketchup says, majority of the Democrats no. I disagree with that, Ketchup. Ryan says, how do you help the middle class who makes too much for government help but makes enough to get fucked? So that is a really good question, Ryan. The answer to that, I believe, is taxing the wealthy. Part of the reason why things are expensive is because you have the billionaire class who is able to, there's no price that restricts them from buying shit, which means that everybody else can't afford the things that they are able to have because they're able to sort of like price us out of being able to enjoy nice things. Breaking up monopolies, investing in the poor, and investing in the working class. Like that's how you actually build an economy that enriches people from the bottom up. That's Bidenomics right there. The issue is that even when we've had Democratic presidents, we've basically had a structure of trickle-down economics since the Reagan administration, and income inequality has gotten worse and worse and worse. And the way that income inequality works is you have to imagine it like a conveyor belt that is slowly pushing people into poverty. It's slowly pushing people into starving to death, slowly pushing people into homelessness. And what happens is it's not that there's a point where you're safe, like you make a certain amount of money and you're safe. It's just that the amount of money that you need to not be on the conveyor belt of poverty keeps on going up and up and up and up as income inequality gets worse and worse and worse. The richer that Elon Musk gets, the more money you need to have to not be in poverty. So, yeah, that's the long and short of it. All right, Jay Gillis says, Citizens United turned over. I'm down for that. Brandon says, could you break down Trump accounts? Good or bad for the taxpayers? Short version, bad. The only evidence I have for that is that you cannot trust Donald Trump or his administration. I do not believe that money in a Trump account will not eventually end up in the pocket of him or his grifting kids. Odinson says, what do you think of a shorter work week or more standard PTO? I am down for all of that. Like, we have had such unbelievable worker productivity over the last 50 years, but we have not seen any of those gains. We have only seen people working harder and making less. I think that a 4-day work week with restricted hours and a standardized PTO that does not punish people for doing things like going on vacation or taking sick days, I think those are really valuable policies. Obviously, the devil's in the details, but yeah, theoretically, I'm for it. Okay. Mikhail Meme, I do not know who Kenneth Copeland is. Ryan says, how is lobbying legal? Lobbying is legal because the billionaire class has been able to make it legal because they have a lot of money, so they are invested in creating a system of legalized bribery. Why would any administration get rid of it? It's difficult to get rid of lobbying because we have a mixed government system. So basically, anytime Democrats get in charge, they have to make sure they have enough seats in the Senate and enough seats in the House and the White House and the Supreme Court in order to enact any kind of change on electoral systems. Now, the issue with that is that not only do Democrats have like a really short margin for that, not only are our electoral systems already weighted against them, and our information systems are weighted against them, so it's really difficult for them to hit that threshold. In addition, if any one of those Democrats gets corrupted, the entire thing is fucked. That's what happened with the Affordable Care Act. Affordable Care Act was supposed to have a single payer option, but they were able to corrupt Joe Lieberman, and so they had to get rid of the public option. That's what happened during the Biden administration. They were able to corrupt Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. Arguably, they were already corrupt, but that's neither here nor there. We had a 0 vote threshold. Jonathan says, does Reaganomics work? No, it does not. And there's no theory that you need to prove that Reaganomics does not work. You only need to look around. Because we have been suffering from Reaganomics since 1980, and income inequality has just gotten worse and worse and worse, and the rich have gotten richer, and the poor have gotten poorer, and the workers are getting fucked more, and the unions aren't as strong as they used to be. It's, yeah. Just, what's my evidence? Gestures to all this shit. It's the Rocketeer says, I can prove that Rocketnomics works. That's pretty funny. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Sophia, great to see you again. Says, do you fully support socialism, or is a larger version of government? I'm not really sure what you mean by that, Sophia. But also, it also depends on how you define socialism. Can you clean up that question, Sophia? Sophia, I know you're a regular. I got a lot of affection for you. There's been a lot of things that you've done lately that make me feel like you're not a real person, but that's neither here nor there. I still appreciate you being here. I just wanted to get that on the record in case years from now we discover that you are a bot or that you're some dude in India or whatever. I just want to be on the record that I had you pegged. But just continue doing whatever you want to do, Sophia. Let's see here. Antoine says, are you a goated Marxist by any chance? I guess it depends on how you define Marxist. I would definitely say that I am goated, and I believe in workers owning the means of production. Okay. Paul says, do you support that in the USA should have public health and education system like in Europe? Yes, I do, 100%. Odinson says, do the minimum wage increases truly harm the market? No, that is billionaire propaganda. Paul says, do you support that? All right, I did that one. Bitnevo, great to see you again. Does it appear to you the oligarchs are attempting to run away with our money? Yes, 100%. Now, there is going to be a limited efficacy to them doing that, both over time and immediately. So it is possible, like right now, that a billionaire could bribe the Trump administration into allowing them to take all of their billions of dollars into a different country so that they can take over the government there the way that they're trying to take over the government here. It's also a possibility, depending on if people do the work and elect good politicians, that we will be able to tax them to the point where if they try to leave, we would get a good portion of their money. It's also possible that we would be able to work with other countries so that there wouldn't be tax havens for the rich anywhere to go to. And the Biden administration was actually working on that policy, and then people decided to vote for Republicans instead. And so now we do not have a universal minimum tax for corporations the way that the Biden administration was working on. Okay, let's see here. John Abbott says, with the land value tax, properties and improvements would still be taxed on the sales, construction, labor. It just wouldn't affect the ongoing annual taxes. That's definitely going to be a benefit to the wealthy, but in that regard, it would be a bigger benefit to the rest of us, since the wealthy are easily capable of paying the high property tax. A pied-à-terre tax on property that is occupiable but empty may be the solution. Yeah, I am down for all of this, man. Let us attack this issue. Let us try things. Let us make sure that we are catching people that are falling through the nets, but we make sure that we are tamping people down that are getting too rich and powerful. Michaela Meme says Kenneth Copeland is a false Christian pastor who is just greedy and wants people to donate money to him and his organization so he can live rich. Well, my thoughts on Kenneth Copeland then, Mikhail, I think you can guess, are that he sucks. Odinson says, why the fuck do churches still not pay taxes? I mean, theoretically, churches are nonprofit organizations that are there to provide charity and support the community. But obviously, that's not something that is universal, unfortunately. Brant Meir says, what do you think the single best argument against MAGA is? Ooh, that's a really good question. I think the problem, Brant, is that there's too much to talk about. Like, and there's so many different kinds of MAGA. Like, are you a MAGA that believes that the Jews are responsible for all the problems? That's going to be a really difficult argument to make because, there's not a lot of data that is going to convince somebody who's just anti-Semitic to stop being anti-Semitic. Or are you the kind of MAGA that believes that just like everything Trump does is great and shit like that? I saw a study recently that said that all you need to do is tell people you're doing a scientific study and ask them to watch other news besides right-wing news. And just doing that study on that people makes people less MAGA and makes people less Republican. So yeah, I think just the news is the best argument against MAGA. Ryan says, you don't think it would be bad to give all these productions and services to the government? I mean, obviously the devil's in the details there, Ryan. Like, if you have, a government-run news organization that could be taken over and, weaponized by a shitty administration like the Trump administration. If you have universal health care that's run by the government, that could potentially be weaponized against Trump's political enemies. Oh, you vote for Democrats in your states? Well, you're not allowed to get cancer treatment anymore. Shit like that. But yeah, where there are issues with the way that government operates in efficiency, corruption, weaponization, we just need good people to fix those problems. And we need good laws to fix those problems. And we need good people to enforce those laws to stop those problems. Ugh. Alrighty, scrolling down to the bottom. TikTok motherfucker says, what are some reasons Democrats didn't reenact the Fairness Doctrine when they were in power? Ooh, so really good question, TikTok motherfucker. So I think part of the issue is that there was a very long gap between when Democrats would have had the power to do that and when that original change happened. So there was kind of like this momentum for not having the Fairness Doctrine anymore. I think additionally, as the Democrats, as we've gotten further and further away from the Reagan administration, we have moved further away from Democrats just being kind of like a light version of Republicans, where Clinton was kind of our neoliberal corporatist Democrat daddy, and the Joe Biden administration was a more progressive FDR kind of administration. And so even when you had political power in people like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, there wasn't the kind of universal progressive ideology to want to get back to something like the Fairness Doctrine. Honestly, though, I think the biggest reason why they didn't bother trying to reenact the Fairness Doctrine is I don't think it's enough right now. Like, the problem of right-wing propaganda and misinformation is so it's soaked into the fabric of American culture right now. I don't think the Fairness Doctrine has enough teeth to get rid of it, to exercise it, I think we need more. I think we need something bigger than the Fairness Doctrine. But yeah, I don't view that as a failure of the Democratic Party. I think, there was this insidious billionaire-funded war against accurate, neutral information, and the Democratic Party has not been in a position for a long time to do anything about that, both in not having any political power to do anything about that, and also not seeing it happen because it was happening, behind the scenes in underground bunkers and shit like that. TKS Daddy says AI models are literally becoming lazy and stupid. Yeah, there's issues with AI. I love Chris Hayes is doing a series right now on AI. Excellent information. Highly recommend, especially the last episode with a true bona fide AI hater who I cannot endorse his perspective enough. Okay, notice GR says, why did capitalism and communism never actually fight against each other? Instead, they just allied against NS. What is NS? Noticer GR. Brant Mears says, what can I do to change my diehard MAGA grandparents that literally believe Obama started COVID? So it sounds like your grandparents are suffering from a sort of like misinformation brain mush. And undoing that is a lot of work. If you really want to do that, I would recommend a book called The Persuaders by Anand Giridharadas. If you go to my bio and you check out my Discord channel, there's a link called recommendations, and all the books that I recommend are there. And The Persuaders is there, so you don't have to worry about writing that shit down. Short version, it's not going to be data and evidence that changes their minds. It is doing more listening, asking more questions, the Socratic methods, figuring out the things that you can agree on, figuring out the realities that you can agree on. Like, for example, Obama was not president during COVID. We can agree on that, right? We agree that Obama wasn't in power, so he would not be able to create COVID, right? And then, depending on how they answer, you kind of got to start from there. NSC means the National Socialists. I don't know if communism and capitalism did just get together to fight against the National Socialists. I mean, you're referring to World War II and America and Russia fighting against Nazi Germany? Is that what you're talking about, Noticer? GR? All right, Sophie says, how do you define socialism? Do you agree with Mamdani's version of socialism? I do agree with Mamdani's version of socialism, which I believe he refers to as democratic socialism. I define socialism as us paying taxes and the government using those taxes to do things that benefit everybody. So paved roads is socialism, public education is socialism, the military is socialism, fire departments are socialism, etc., etc. VA says, what's your opinion on statist phalangism? I'm against it. Paul says, what's your opinion on communism and the Soviet Union? I do not believe that Russia or China have ever been actually communist because they were essentially authoritarian states, and I believe that authoritarianism is antithetical to the philosophy of communism and socialism. So yeah, but workers owning the means of production, I'm down for that. Okay. Mr. Little House Man. I don't know. Did you ever tell me what your name was or what I should call you? Little Mr. Housekim says, what's your opinion on the buzzwordification of the word fascist? This has been going on for a long time. Both Democrats and Republicans have been throwing around fascism and Hitler shit and Nazi shit in order to try to win arguments for a long time. But I think that if you talk to the people who actually study fascism, they have a definition. These are the things that fascist governments do. And I think that people generally should agree on that. Attacking institutions of higher learning, attacking the press, consolidating power, eliminating checks and balances, blaming marginalized communities, enriching themselves, corruption, shit like that. Brant Mears says, if you could change the requirements to become president, what would you change them to? I would probably be like, you have to have had at least one government position in your life before you can run for president, so we don't get any more fucking egotistical billionaires. But it can be anything, like you could be president of your school board or your PTA or whatever. And nobody over the age of 70. And you need to regularly release your medical records and your financial records. Can't be a felon seems pretty good. To me, Just Cause. Now, hold on a second, Just Cause. I'm with you. But we need to remember that the justice system has been weaponized against the black and brown populations in America for a really long time. So there are a lot of felons out there unjustly in the black and brown community. So, but I take your point. I know exactly who and what we are talking about. The Victor Mike says, Jon Stewart president. I like Jon Stewart. I think he'd be good. Kivo says, do you think Lebanon could ever become a great country again? Absolutely. Every country can be a great country so long as good people do the work. VA says, what do you think about juntoism? Is that not this? I don't know what you mean by that. Trent says, can Kazakhstan lead over the entire world? Maybe, eventually. Sophia says, but when a country becomes socialist, doesn't that blur the lines between real socialism and communism? No, I think the issue, Sophia, is communist there's never been a socialist country. There's never been a communist country. There are countries that adopt the title of socialism and communism, but that aren't socialist and communist. So we can't really say when a country becomes socialism, doesn't it do X, Y, or Z? And yeah, I don't know that there's a slippery slope from socialism into communism. I find that argument to be pretty thin, Sophia. Right. Political Alpha says, what's 13 times 14? That is not a political question, Political Alpha. Brant Meir says, I remember you mentioning you like Chris Murphy. Can you explain who he is and why you like him? Chris Murphy appears to me to be a real put your head down and do the fucking work kind of politician. I don't see him equivocating and doing political speak. He's had a couple of speeches recently like that I think were just like fucking truly on point. Like towards the beginning of the Trump administration, he was fucking hammering Kristi Noem over the ICE abuses that were going on. This was before Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Like he's been on this for a minute. But yeah, he's a senator from Connecticut, and I like the way that he communicates. I don't have his vote breakdowns in front of me, but I'm pretty confident that he's been on the right side of a lot of these votes, including, for example, not sending any more money and weapons to Israel. But yeah, yeah, I just I think he's got good vibes. Oh, right. Scalarpar says, what do you think about Sweden's politics? Don't know anything about it. Little house emoji says, my name is the legionary symbol. I forgot to mention it. My bad. I don't know what legionary means. All right. Legionary says legion. You are legion. You are legion is what I refer to you as. Michael Anthony says, Murphy is great and relatively young. That's another thing I like about him. Would love him elevated into greater leadership somewhere. Completely agree with that. Pierre says, is Israel doing something wrong? Yes, the government of Israel is doing many, many wrong things. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is doing many, many, many wrong things. All right, everybody, we are at about an hour. If you like what I'm doing and you think that what I'm doing is productive and you want to support me continuing to do shows like this, I would encourage you to support the show however you can, be it telling everybody how great the show is or contributing financially. You can send gifts on TikTok. You can send bits on Twitch. You can be a super fan on TikTok. You can be a subscriber on Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, you can subscribe to my Twitch for free. Costs you $0, helps me out a ton. I also have a Patreon that you can join for as little as $1 a month, though there is a very fun incentive at $10. Special thanks to my regular financial contributors: Pliff, Average Joe, Triska, Lauren, Grimicus, It's the Rocketeer, the two Seans, D, Shannon, Carmine, and Patrick. If you would also like to have your name read at the end of my show sometimes, become a Twitch subscriber, a TikTok superfan, or join the Patreon. And I actually believe I can look up like who are my like big funders now. I think my top 3 funders on this show, I could be wrong. I think that this is what this metric thing here means, or maybe this just comments. I gotta figure out how to actually look that up, because I would love to thank the people who give the most gifts in the live stream. All right, yeah, I'll figure out how to do that later. Alrighty, if there are any questions that I was not able to get to on this live stream, please reach out to me. Do not be shy. I want to be a resource for you. So if there's any way that I can get you more informed or more involved about politics, use me and abuse me. Use me until you use me up. DMs are open. You can email me through my website, or you can hit me up on my Discord channel. Link for all that shit is in the bio. The Discord channel is also great because it's a great community of people there that discuss politics in ways that is not shitty. And also, there's recommendations there for books and podcasts, and also recommendations for civic actions that everybody can take and that everybody should take. Hold on a second. Sophia says, so do you think Scandinavia is socialist? Because some people use that as an example of why socialism works. So that's a really good question, Sophia. So some people would argue that Scandinavia is an example of a mixed model where they are a little bit socialist and a little bit communist and a little bit capitalist. That's like the argument that I would make. I would say that Scandinavia and America have a very similar relationship between their governments and economy. The difference is that in Scandinavia, they have more socialism and more communism and less unregulated capitalism. And in America, we're the king of sacrificing communism and socialism at the altar of unregulated capitalism and crony capitalism. So yeah, I think that's the big difference. Is not that Scandinavia is socialist, but that Scandinavia has more of those socialist programs and enables their working class with communist policies and strengthens their working class with communist policies. Alrighty, and yeah, please just everybody do the work. That is the only way that we get out of this, is if we all get together and we do the work and we help each other out and we recruit and we use the political power that we have as citizens. Muzz King, Fudgems, and Triska, thank you so much for helping me reach my second Finger Hearts goal of the day. All right, everybody, do the work. Be good to each other. You don't have to be a dick to do the work. What else? Be good to yourselves. Self-care is part of the work. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you again. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.